The reason you clicked on this video means only one thing. You have joined a draft league and have no idea where to start or look for when you draft a team. So welcome to Draft League 101. Here we'll talk about the basics of draft, the fundamental cores that you can draft in your team, the additional points of interest when you want to complete your draft, and is there any exceptions when building a team? And we're going to start with what is a draft league. And for this example, I will show you the latest doc of the league. I'm an admin in BDL. So here we are on the doc. We are on the rule page here, and for example, these are just general battle rules and bans, but we are gonna ignore that for now, but we're gonna go to the draft rules. So everyone will be given 100 points for 10 months, meaning you have 100 points and you have to draft 10 months. This is important because otherwise you could just draft 8 months, so you have a higher average point number for your months that you draft, because, well, your number of months drafted is lower, but this makes sure that you have an average of 10 points for 10 months. You will see this a lot, but generally draft is going to be a snake draft. So if you see a draft order and you're number 1, you are in the first round, you're gonna have the first pick, and the second round it's gonna be in reverse. So in the second round, you're gonna have the last pick. So basically, if it's a snake, it's gonna go down, up here again, and then down. Draft timer means just the time that you have to pick your mon. If this timer is not gonna be used, you will be skipped, and you can make up your picks at the next opportunity for you. The timer will also start at different times, so there's gonna be a time where you can still pick, but there will not be a timer for anyone. The more important things on this thing right here is the standings page. So you can see in this league there was 16 people, 2 divisions, and each one has 8 people. Top 4 made playoffs, and you can see games played is 8. So they each played everyone in their own division and had 1 cross-division match. This is gonna probably change from league to league. There's also 9 weeks, 8 games played with 9 people in a division with no cross-division match. Each league handles it on their own, and you will see, or you will probably need to read the rules to see what is important for that league. Which is more important for you in this video is this draft boards with points. As you can see, this board is going from 18 all the way down to 1. And a Pokemon picked will have shown the team that has picked that mon, and you know that you cannot pick that mon yourself if you don't have it picked already. That makes it so people don't draft the same mons. Meaning if you pick Geo as your first pick, the second pick cannot also draft Geo. There are some exceptions what you can pick. For example, if you're searching for example, Rotom, you can see Rotom Wash is in 14 points, but also that normal Rotom is in 5, Rotom Frost is in 5, and Rotom Heat, for example, is in 12. If you are crazy and would like to draft Rotom Wash and Rotom Heat, that is not possible because there is a rule saying that you cannot draft Pokemon that have the same dex number. What that means is Rotom and Rotom Heat, Rotom Wash and Rotom Heat have the same dex amount, they're just different forms. The same things would, for example, go with Garchomp Mega and normal Garchomp. They are different forms of each other, but they have the same dex number, so you cannot draft Garchomp Mega and Garchomp. Another rule is every team can only draft 1 Mega, so you don't hoard all the Megas. I know you can only Mega 1 anyway per battle, but people want to use Megas. It would be a dick move to draft every Mega, even though you can only Mega 1 and then just play with 6 mons with all Mega Stones, which is not good anyway. So, but yeah, basically let's look at my team of that season, which is this one, and you can see I drafted 10 mons, and I can guarantee you that if you would look at the where is it? At the board page, and if you add up all the points, you probably close something around 100, maybe 98. If you have like 1 or 2 points over, that's usually not usually actually not that problematic, because there is gonna be a transaction thing. You can change Pokemon in your roster up to 5 times. But the points total still has to come up to 100, and Pokemon you have dropped are not allowed to be picked up again. This is so we don't encourage, for example, that you trade single mons just for example a certain bad matchup and just pick it up again because it suits a team. Now that we talked about what a draft league is in its core, what are fundamental cores to draft Pokemon, you've already seen the first, or the one team I showed that I drafted, and fundamental cores in draft league are example fire, water, grass cores. Everyone knows fire, water, grass. They're starter in every game, and everyone knows if you pick the fire starter in earlier generations, your opponent picked water because they have advantages against you. Water is strong against fire, fire is strong against grass, grass is strong against water. They are each very effective against each other in a circle, but if you go in that circle in the other direction, each move is resisted by that type. Fire is weak against water. Water is not very effective against grass, and grass is not very effective against fire. And this is the most basic core that you're looking for in your team, because it's very simple. Everyone gonna probably have one of these types, and it's just very good for team building having these. Water mons are mostly bulky because they have a great synergy with being bulky and their resistances and stuff. I've seen some people not draft a Firemon because they are annoyed of Stealth Rock weaknesses, and there has been a lot of teams not picking up a Grass. Main reason for that is because Grass is not very is resisted by a lot of types, but it's also a lot of weaknesses in the game. I think they're up to 5 or something, and is generally considered not that good. The main reason you're picking up grass is because a lot of teams are ground weak, and Earthquake being 100 base power and one of the strongest move without a drawback in the game makes grass Pokemon be more valuable because they resist ground. The next core that we want to talk about is the Fairy Dragon Steel core. This is the core that I didn't know about when I started myself, but it's probably the more important core than the Fire, Grass, Water core. The reason for that, Fairy Dragon Steel, they cover, like, okay, they are also kind of effective against each other. Like Fairy is super strong against Dragon. Steel is very effective against Fairy. But Dragon is not very effective against Steel, although most Dragon types have higher type attacks to super effectively hit Steel. It's not stab though, so you could kind of argue that this is still the case. But what's more important about Fairy Dragon Steel Core is the weakness chart. As you can see, these are the weaknesses of each of the types, and if we're just looking of how these types are resisted. If these 3 Pokemon are in a trio, you can see most of them are resisted except ground. The Fairy's weaknesses of Steel and Poison are resisted by Steel. Dragon's weaknesses of Fairy, Dragon, and Ice actually is resisted by Steel, and Dragon is even immune. Fairies are even immune to Dragon types attacks. And also Steel's weaknesses of Fighting is resisted by Fairy, Fire is resisted by Dragon, and Ground remains. The Fairy Dragon Steel core is often in a lot of drafts 3 mons being very high points wise because of this defensive advantage. Like just this trio existing makes team building way easier, because if these are your high tier points that you want to bring anyway, you already have a lot of defensive synergy, and and they're also just very good defensively as well, because these are not all the resistances. Fairies, for example, still resist bug. Dragons resist also electric and water types attack, grass types attacks. And steel still resists normal, psychic, bug, I think rock as well. Grass, like, okay, they share a lot of defensive coverage and weaknesses and cover each other perfectly. Then the last core that you could talk about is Dark Psychic Fighting. It's not really that often seen, but I'm still gonna talk about it because it is a core that you could build around in your team. Fighting being super effective against Dark, Dark being super effective against Psychic, Psychic being super effective against Fighting. And if you're going in that circle in the other direction, Dark is resisted by Fighting, Fighting is resisted by Psychic, and Psychic is doing 0 damage to Dark type. So it's similar to Grass, Water, and Fire, but with the exception that there's one immunity in that circle. What else should you look for in a team? There's certain things that you might want on your team depending on how important you think they are. These things are speed tiers. They're kind of fake, and the opinion on speed tiers is shifting a little bit in the community, but we will talk about on this in an example. Then hazards, removal, and the weakness chart. And if you don't know what these means, I will explain it on an example now. So if we look at this was my last matchup in an Ubers League I was in, and as you can see, the top team is mine, the bottom team is the enemy, my opponents. And for example, was a league that had you draft 10 to 12 mons, my opponent choosing drafting 10 mons with a higher average point total for the mons on the top, while I choose more of a balanced approach. As you can see, with Glacier and Perkly not being the best, that could have been scrapped and upgrade a few months in these 10. But what we want to talk about first is speed tiers. By the way, these are matchup helpers and planners that you can find online. I really encourage you to find one or use one, learn how to use them, and they're just very helpful. So, as you can see, this would be the speed tier. Why is speed so important? For example, my 136 speed Iron Bundle would outspeed Metagross. Let's say in a situation where they're both at 20%. Why is speed so important? Well, because if, talking about Metagross not having Bullet Punch here, if I move before the Metagross, I can kill the Metagross before it can kill me. So that's why speed is important. Moving before the opponent just changes things certain interactions can do. For example, if I could also use an Ice Beam on something like a Zapdos. He switches into Metagross because he resisted the ice, but I freeze him. That was now an example of switching, but if I would just be stupid and predicted the Metagross switching into, for example, Primarina and click freeze dry, and I froze him with freeze dry, then he would still be frozen because I move faster. Speed tiers. Why am I talking about speed tiers? The thing is, every Pokemon has a speed, also, so their base speed is also considered being their speed tier. You don't want too big of a gap between your speed tiers because, as you can see here, going from 85 to 60, my Mega Scissor, if this would be a full speed Prim, my Mega Scissor could go, if you're going into Team Builder, Netdex Draft, my Mega Scissor could go, for example, 252 EV in attack and 252 into speed. If Prim would be 70 speed, I would need to get plus speed minus special attack into Mega Scissor to make sure that it still outspeeds the Primarina. But because they have such a difference in speed of 15 base points. In this case, I don't have to go for speed and still outspeed, so I can choose my positive nature in attack and do a little bit more attack. As you can see, the nature gave me 39 additional points in attack, which can make a difference in damage calcs and stuff. So speed tiers, you just want to make sure these are not too much in one place. As you can see here, 90 and 90 is not really that good. Double 60, double 65. It's not really that good, but the lower you go, the more likely you're forgetting about speed tiers anyway, because slower ones tend to be more bulky and want to invest in HP and defense, or HP and attacking stat instead of speed. Speed tiers are more important if you want to look for like 80 and above. As you can see, 90, 92, 95, 100, 100, 105 and 100, 112 and 100, 112, 110, 136, and his one is actually the fastest in this matchup here, 138. Now, the next thing I've talked about was hazards. We can also go a little bit down here and see these are hazards. Hazards are Stealth Rock spikes, T-spikes, and sticky webs. And generally what they are, I think you should know. If you want to start Draft League, you should know what these moves do. But basically, you want some hazard setters that you can bring to every game. For example, my hazards, like, okay, I have Gliscor that has Stealth Rock spikes and T-spikes. You don't need to have every hazard, but it's generally better having one of each. Maybe not Sticky Web, because they're kind of not really out there. There's not a lot of good Sticky Web users, and most of them are bug types, low tier bug types, so it's not really worth getting one. But as you can see, I generally thought that Stealth Rocks would be important for my team, so I have 3 Stealth Rock users. The thing is, I have 3 Stealth Rock users, but actively I'm only ever bringing Gliscor and Empoleon as a Stealth Rock user. Arcanine Hisui is an exceptional Scarf or Choice Band Mon with his ability Rockhead and his attacks Head Smash, Flare Blitz, and other types of attacks that I would never probably consider bringing hazard my Stealth Rocks on Arcanine. So I do have Empoleon and Gliscor though. And the thing is, if I have a game where I don't want to bring Stealth Rocks on Gliscor, I can easily put Empoleon on the team as well. That was hazard, but probably more important than hazards is removal. As you can see, I have quite a certain choice of removal options, with the best ones being Empoleon or my Braviary Hisui, because they can still come to a game and bring defog. Gliscor doesn't really want defog because it already struggles with 4 moves anyway. Scizor can bring it in some games if you bring it like defensively, and I would never want to bring defog on my Zekrom. And if you would look at my opponents, he has Zapdos and Kleavor. If I see this, Kleavor would also never really like bringing defog as well, as it's a good Scarfer. It could bring it as like if you don't have a 4th move you really need, like what's Kleavor gonna bring? Maybe U-turn, Stone Axe, Close Combat, and the 4th move, Night Slash. It could be defog as like a last resort. So that leaves him with only Zapdos being able to defog. If I know that, I could probably play around that if I planned around like hazard spamming him. And if I even manage to kill Zapdos early, I can make sure to set up my hazards, and these hazards stay on the field for the rest of the game. And the last thing we want to talk about if you're completing your team is the weakness chart. These are also very often found in all of these team building pages, and as you can see, this is my team. Green meaning I still have a very good matchup overall against these types of attacks, but then we can see fighting, ground and rock being red, ghost and dark and fairy not just being gray, so being neutral. And if you can see, this thing just calcs how much resistances do I have against a certain type and how many weaknesses. For example, against fire, I have a 2 times weakness and a 4 times weakness. So I have 2 weaknesses, but I have an immunity. In an Arcanine Azure, this thing also calculates if it has an ability that just negates damage, but even if Arcanine wasn't an immunity, it would still only take a quarter of the damage from fire type attacks. Zekrom being an being resist, and the thick fat from my Paracle being calculated. If we look at ground now though, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 weaknesses, and I only have 2 immunities and 1 resist. So I have 4 weaknesses and 3, I'd say, resists, making me weak against ground attacks, because generally I will be taking a lot of damage against ground. There are some exceptions for this rule. For example, if you have something similar like this, but instead of your ground, or not your ground type, instead of your, let's say Glaceon being Zygarde 50. Zygarde 50 is generally so bulky and still neutral to stuff like Earthquake that you don't really care, or like, it's not really care, but it's kind of like an resist against ground, because it can take a lot of ground attacks because of its high HP and high defense. But in this case, Rock, you will see a lot of ground weak teams. Grass types are not very good. Steel types are very good if you have a fire type. That is another weakness. I have 2 electric types in that case. And yeah. Generally though, what I also did in the past is focus too much on that and draft Pokemon solely because they fit and make the weakness chart look nicer. But in general, I'd say rather draft Pokemon that you know that you can bring and is gonna be useful on your team if you bring that Pokemon instead of going for very good looking green weakness chart. Is there, so we talked about these teams, but are there any exceptions about that? Like, do I always need to draft a Fire Water Grass core? Do I always need to look at speed tiers? Do I always need Dragon Fairy Steel and stuff like that? And I'd say no. Some exceptions are water and terrain based teams and team specifics, and we will go over that in short thing, or you could also call exceptions. What kinds of teams can I build besides that general balanced approach? And here we are back in the team builder, and I've already prepared something, and we're gonna look at the weather-based teams first. So what I've done here is I always put the important Pokemon for that specific team in the front, then some very like interesting ones in the middle, and stuff that looked like they synergize well with it, but are kind of a trap. So rain, obviously you need to have a rain setter. Rain setters are Pokemon that come in and somehow with an ability make the weather change to rain. For this we have Drizzle on Pelipper and Politoed. So if you want to go for a rain team, I generally recommend one of these two. Of course, you could always go for Rain Dance, but why would you want to waste a turn to use Rain Dance when you could just have Pelipper or Politoed? Switch them in, they get rain automatically on the turn, and they don't waste a turn for Rain Dance. By the way, if you don't know, you can also use Weather Stones to increase the turns the weather effects take from 5 to 7. So you get 2 extra turns of rain, for example. And Pelipper is considered a better one because, for example, it's generally more bulky, it lasts longer because it has roost, it has U-turn for momentum, so you can switch it into an attack, U-turn the next one, and go into one of your important Pokemon that use the rain. Politoed is generally more like, okay, I still am a rain setter and I'm better than any rain dancer, but Politoed doesn't have U-turn. It itself is not really that good if it needs to attack, because Pelipper can use the rain itself, use the boosted water moves, as that can Politoed do as well, but Pelipper also has access to Hurricane, which is always a 100% hit rate in rain. And the interesting mons for rain, for example, Kingdra is just an example for a Swift Swim mon. Swift Swim mons double their speed while being in rain, which is very important and makes a lot of rain teams ignore speed tiers, for example, like that, because as you can see, you have an 85 speed on a base speed on Kingdra, but that number doubles if you go into the rain. Then I've chosen Urshifu Rapid as a generally good water breaker, with its triple punch move that ignores shields and stuff because of its ability. Just as a general breaker, because the rain boosts water type attacks by 50%, so it attacks even harder. Swampert being one of the megas of choice. If you want to go for rain, a lot of people will tell you that it's fake and a trap and it's not really good. Kinda is. They're kinda right, but it still is a Swift Swim mon in the rain if you want to have a mega. Then stuff that is maybe not obviously a rain mon at first, but Kilowattrel is really nice at that. Not because of any ability or stuff, but because it has access to the move Thunder and Hurricane, which are very strong moves that are balanced by its accuracy. But these two moves, with Stab, by the way, on Kilowattrel, are always 100% accurate. The higher point version of Kilowattrel would be Zapdos, but a lot of non-rain teams also appreciate the Zapdos, so that was just put in. And something that maybe also is not that on the eye in a rain team, but Heliolisk. Dryskin also lets it heal one certain percentage on if it stands in rain. It is also a water immunity because of Dryskin, which is very nice because yes, you yourself will also take 50% more damage from water-based moves. And which is also really cool is Heliolisk generally struggles with ground type Pokemon, but with Rain, its Weather Ball is getting from a 50 base power normal move to a 100 base power no, water move, which can hit its ground type very effectively. And as for the kind of traps in Rain teams, we have Blastoise as an example for Rain Dish. Rain Dish, yes, it synergizes with Rain, but generally leftovers are better. And why waste another most likely water type just so you can heal a little bit but still take more damage every turn if as you're getting attacked? Rain Dash, one of the big losers in the Rain team. And Gudra, although Gudra can be argued for, still can be in like a Rain team. But it's generally more about hydration. Hydration, being cured of status problems and not being affected by status in rain sounds good for a rain team, but generally not that useful. These are generally better, and I'd instead go for more team synergy. So you have a rain mode, but you can also play without the rain. Then we have Sun, which generally has a lot of the same mechanics as Rain. I've also forgot Rain also makes fire types attack do 50% less damage. Sun is basically the inverted Rain, with the Sun setups being Torkoal, Ninetales, and Mega Charizard Y. And the Sun users being, for example, Mega Houndoom, if you don't go Mega Charizard Y, for example, for a Mega being Solar Power Mon, Heliolisk, that do more damage in the sun but take a certain amount of damage at the end. Chlorophyll being the swift swim ability of the Sun, and Venusaur being one user of them. And then we have all of the Paradox mons from the past. Here being Walking Wake and Great-Tusk, for example. Walking Wake being making its special move being boosted in the Sun instead of being weakened, although it's a water move with Hydro Steam. And Photosynthesis also makes the highest stat go up one stage if they're in the Sun, which is very good generally. So you can boost, for example, speed or special attack on Walking Wake. And for the kind of thing is Leaf Guard being the equivalent to Hydration. Not really good. Okay, you're safe from status, but you generally want to go and kill things while the sun is up. I was thinking about showing Harvest here, because Harvest as an ability is not really that bad actually, but all the mons that have Harvest are bad, so I would not recommend drafting one of them. Then we have Sand teams. Sand works a little bit different than Sun and Rain, for example. Sand damages every Pokemon not being Rock, Steel, or Ground. And it also gives Rock mons a 50% in special defense while Sand is up. Sand types are Tyranitar, Hippowdon, Gigalith, and to a certain extent Sandaconda. Tyranitar and Mega Tyranitar as well, and Sandaconda are not really the best sand setters because they're not really that made for sand. Sandaconda not really activating sand except like Sand Spit and when it gets hit. And T-Tar has a lot of weaknesses. I'd rather use T-Tar as a, okay, I have sand and I can somehow use it, but I wouldn't use T-Tar as a sand setter. Gigalith and Hippowdon are generally better for that. Hippowdon is the one with more longevity because of its lack of move where it can heal 50% of itself. And Gigalith is more of the, okay, it's time for the end game now. Gigalith having the move Explosion coming in, activating 7 centers, explode, deal a lot of damage, and the rest of the Pokemon still have 6 turns to use that sand. The two best Sand Rush Pokemon in the format are currently Excadrill and Dracozolt. Excadrill still probably having to use 1 turn for Sword Stance to reliably kill anything in its way, and Dracozolt having its Bolt Beak double in power from 75 to 150 if it moves first, and Sand Rush obviously helps Dracozolt achieving that. Otherwise, you can still look for stuff, for example, with like Overcoat to have mons that are not really that into that ground and steel area to not take damage. For example, I chose here Como because it's generally a good Pokemon. And I wanted to mention Sandforce. Sandforce Pokemon are generally not that good because of just the mons that have Sandforce, Gastrodon, for example, or Mega Steelix. Not that good. Landorus can be used in Sandforce. In most leagues, it's only legal with Sandforce. But if it has access to Sheer Force, it will always use Sheer Force with the Life Orb, which is generally better. Mons I would not look into, for example, first of all, Garchomp, the normal Garchomp is here with Sand Veil because this is banned, and any evasion boosting ability or move is generally banned in draft leagues. Garchomp is just one of the examples. And I would also not recommend Mega Garchomp in a Sand team because Mega Garchomp is already so strong in its attack that it doesn't need Sand Force to boost that even further. I'd rather go for a different Mega that can do something else for your team instead of going Sand with a Mega Garchomp. Then, as in the last generation, Hail has begun to rise. The generally good Hail doesn't really have good setter. Ninetales Alola has become the primary Hail setter, being able to also get an Aurora Veil up, being Reflect and Light Screen on the same turn. The other three are not really good. I'd still put Vanilluxe a little bit above Aurorus and Abomasnow. Mega Abomasnow, by the way, can also has Snow Warning if you want to do that, but keep in mind that the Mega Abomasnow cannot hold a weather extending rock, so that Mega Snow only gets 5 turns. Hail has become a little bit of or not, it's actually not hail anymore, but more like snow. And snow has become the equivalent to sand. But except it doesn't do damage anymore as snow, but it increases the defense of ice type Pokemon by 50%. And for that reason, I chose Kyurem, because Kyurem behind the sub has potential to keep its up against a lot of physical attacking stuff because of the 50% defense boost. Arctozolt and the Titan being the best Slush Rush users. They are not the fastest, but that's, if you can see here, the Titan being 73, Arctozolt being 555. What makes them so fearful actually is the Titan moving in speed, being bulky and dishing out damage, for example. And Arctozolt because electric and ice is one of the hardest things to actually resist in the entire game. There's a term used being Bolt Beam, consisting of the terms for Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, and the reason because is because these two, like electric and ice, very very hard to go against. Mons that are actually not but Snowcloak, not allowed. I would also not go for the ice moves. This is basically rain. The ice ability that's basically rain dish, because ice is very very bad defensively. Ice mons do want to go for offense, and it's nice that they get a defensive boost, but not a lot of ice mons can actually use that because, well, they're gonna get hit hard a lot of the time. And as we have finished now our talk about these weather teams, we have now a quick step into the electric terrain. Electric terrain is set up by Tapu Koko and Pincurchin. If you want to go for an electric terrain team, I would not recommend Pincurchin. If you want to do that, get Koko. If you don't have the ability to get Koko, don't do an electric terrain team. All of these mons can still be used without electric terrain, but if you don't have Koko, don't go for an electric terrain team. I'm showing here all the Iron mons because their ability Quark Drive is basically the same what the Paradox mon from the past have, but with the electric terrain. And you could also go for something like Hawlucha that we will have later on in the presentation, which can have an electric seed because these seeds trigger on switch, and if the terrain is up, they will get a boost and use the item and go for a sweep, hopefully. Generally, I can't, like, all of these can make use of the electric terrain. Iron Hands maybe not that much. It still uses, like, Iron Hands itself is still a very good Pokemon. Iron Crown I would generally recommend not drafting at all because it's not very good. Even with an electric terrain or like the ability boost, it doesn't make very much sense to use it. It's very lackluster overall. It doesn't specializes in everything. It can't do all of that very well, and the others are generally better. Iron Thorns also maybe more in the Iron Hands category that can work very well, and Iron Threads as well, without electric terrain, but doesn't hurt to have them on the team. Then Psychic Terrain. Psychic Terrain, also by the way, also on electric terrain, Pokemon can't fall asleep. Not really that useful, that team does. For Psychic Terrain, the main Psychic Terrain setters are Tapu Lele and D2 in DD forms. Psychic Terrain actually blocks priority moves from being used. And the big winners of that are, for example, Alakazam, because it's fast, it's frail, it's kind of scared by Sucker Punch or actually Shadow Sneaks, and it has the move Expanding Force, which gets stronger because it's Psychic Stab, and Expanding Force gets, I think, doubled or 50% boost in Psychic Terrain. So you want Alakazam just to spam the Expanding Force move on others while they can't outspeed because they cannot use Sucker Punch because Alakazam is saved by that from the Psychic Terrain. Iron Boulder and Chi-Yu are also there because Iron Boulder is just basically weak to any priority. Chi-Yu also weak to a lot of other priority and not being psychic type, so just wanted to include it here because Aqua Jet and Mach Punch are also very threatening for the little Chi-Yu, and Hawlucha just being here for being unburdened, Psychic Seed, and maybe Sword Stance, and then acrobatic your way through your enemy. I'm mentioning grassy terrain here, but I haven't put anything. You can build a team around grassy terrain. Grassy terrain heals every Pokemon on the ground by 6%. Generally, not that good. You can do it with some stuff that wants to heal a little bit, but generally, grassy terrain is okay to have if you're ground weak and stuff, but it's not really worth building a team around it. And then we have Misty terrain. I'm not gonna mention that here. Misty has like 0 advantage of being used. Tapu Fini itself can use it very well because it can set up and can't be toxic and stuff. But Misty terrain, if you build a team around Misty terrain, you might as well just forfeit the league anyway. As the last thing, choose mons that you want to use. Choose mons that you find interesting. If you want to keep playing Draft League, you will have enough time to actually learn and make a way on top of the league anyway. Use the teams you want to use first. These are just general tips that I recommend if you want to have an easier time to get into Draft League and don't want to lose as much. And for the last thing, I just want to show you a quick info dump that I think is important. So here we are in the Pokemon Showdown Team Builder, and first of all, you don't need to have every type of Pokemon on your team, but I generally recommend having a Dark type because I have seen so many teams that have been lost to Core Mind, Iron Core Mind, and a defense boosting move, Slag Off, so healing, and Stored Power. Why is Dark type important for that? Well, because Stored Power is the only attacking move in a Pokemon like that. They can't hit the Dark type. They can't do anything against the Pokemon. And having a Dark type, a good Dark type, if you have or your opponent has a Pokemon that can generally do something like that, it will make it way harder to actually pull off. Like, okay, you can still stop that with other things, like you can roar them, maybe Pokemon has Taunt that you can stop that setup early. You can resist that, or you can kill it before something else does. You can try to crit it first, but having a Dark type generally good for the Psychic immunity. And then we have Iron Defense Body Press coming through even more. I just saying, okay, you can deal with that easier because they're still not boosting their special defense really, but they could go into like HP and special defense and still don't take that much damage from special attacks. Just be careful. You could draft a ghost if you're afraid of that, if you're losing to that, and I generally say that newer people lose to that, but also still very top players, very high tier players that just forget that this is a possibility or feel like this is not really a threat on their team, as they can still lose to that. Otherwise, water types are generally very good Pokemons. be careful that you have at least some sort of removal, otherwise you will get hazard stacked. And just have fun. I hope you have a great season in BDL and see you soon.